"You're making a mistake," Angela Brooks said, her voice steady despite the cold press of the pavement beneath her cheek, the flashing red and blue lights slicing through the night like broken signals no one wanted to read as the crowd gathered just beyond the patrol car, murmurs rising, phones lifting, the soft hum of live-stream notifications already beginning to echo through the humid evening air. Officer Daniel Carter stood over her, posture rigid, one hand resting near his radio, the other gesturing with controlled authority that left no room for questions, his expression unreadable but firm, trained into that neutral mask that came with years on the force, the kind that didn't bend easily even when uncertainty crept in. Angela didn't resist, didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, her hands placed exactly where instructed, her breathing slow and measured as if she were anchoring herself to something deeper than the moment, something unshakable. A child's voice broke through the tension from the sidewalk, small but clear. "She helped my mom." And for a fraction of a second the air shifted, a ripple through the bystanders, a hesitation that almost reached Carter but stopped just short, swallowed by protocol and assumption. The cruiser's engine idled nearby, headlights washing the scene in harsh white light that flattened every shadow, every expression, turning faces into outlines and emotions into guesses. Angela's eyes moved once, just once, toward the reflection in the car door, catching the flicker of herself there, composed, silent, present, before returning to stillness. Carter spoke into his radio, his voice clipped, procedural, numbers and codes that sounded detached from the human weight sitting just feet away, and backup units began to echo through the channel, distant sirens layering over the already heavy atmosphere. The metallic click of handcuffs closing wasn't loud, but it carried a small sound that seemed to ripple outward through the watching crowd, through the screens recording every second, through the quiet disbelief forming in the spaces between breaths. Angela didn't flinch, didn't pull away, only lifted her chin slightly as she was guided toward the back seat, the door opening with a hollow creak before shutting her inside. The world outside instantly muted, reduced to muffled voices and flashing color through tinted glass. Inside, the space felt smaller than it looked, the faint scent of vinyl and disinfectant hanging in the air, the partition reflecting fragmented pieces of her face back at her, and still, her voice came once more, calm, unwavering. "You're making a mistake." Not louder this time, not sharper, just certain. Outside, Carter's radio crackled again, louder now, overlapping voices stepping over one another, urgency threading through the static, but he didn't reach for it immediately, his attention still locked on the closed door, on the woman inside who hadn't raised her voice once, who hadn't shown fear the way he expected, who hadn't fit the script he'd already started to write. The crowd pressed a little closer, the glow of screens brighter now, comments flooding in somewhere unseen, a moment, turning into something larger than anyone on that street could fully grasp yet. Then the radio cut sharply through everything, a single voice breaking the noise with unmistakable authority, firm, direct, impossible to ignore, and Carter's hand froze mid-motion as the words began to land one by one, changing the weight of the air before he even fully understood why the voice on the radio did not repeat itself. It sharpened, cutting through the static with a precision that made every nearby officer go still for half a breath. "Unit 47, confirm status immediately." And Carter blinked, his fingers tightening slightly around the device before lifting it slowly, as if the weight had suddenly changed. "This is Unit 47, routine detainment," he replied, but the words felt thinner now, less certain, and the dispatcher did not acknowledge them right away. Instead, another voice entered the channel, deeper, controlled, carrying a tone that did not belong to street-level communication. "Stand by for directive." And that was when the atmosphere shifted in a way no one could quite name yet, the kind of shift that moved through instinct before logic, like a storm rolling in without warning. Inside the cruiser, Angela sat upright despite the confined space, her shoulders relaxed, her gaze steady on the faint reflection in the partition, the flashing lights painting brief strokes of red and blue across her face, each pulse revealing the same calm expression, unchanged, unwavering, as if she had already stepped beyond the moment everyone else was still trapped inside. Outside, the crowd's murmurs grew more focused, less chaotic, Whispers turning into quiet questions, phones still raised but now held with a different kind of attention, something between curiosity and unease. Because even without hearing the radio clearly, they could feel that something had interrupted the pattern. Carter shifted his stance, glancing toward his partner who had just stepped out of the second patrol car, both of them exchanging a look that did not need words, a question hanging between them, unspoken but heavy. And then the radio came alive again, louder this time, the authority unmistakable. Unit 47. You are instructed to release the individual immediately and await further contact. The phrasing precise, formal, leaving no room for interpretation, and for a second Carter did not move, his training colliding with something unfamiliar, something that did not fit the usual chain of command he operated within. He lowered the radio slowly, eyes drifting back to the cruiser door, to the woman inside who had not raised her voice once, who had not argued, who had simply said the same sentence, twice with a certainty that now echoed louder than the commands in his ear. And around him the scene held its breath, the crowd quieter now, the air heavier, even the distant traffic seeming to fade into the background, as if the entire block was waiting for the next decision. Angela closed her eyes for a brief moment, not in fear, not in relief, but in stillness, a pause that felt intentional, like a breath taken at the exact right time. And when she opened them again, nothing in her posture had changed, nothing in her expression had shifted, but the world outside that car was no longer the same as it had been just minutes ago. Carter stepped closer to the door, his hand hovering near the handle, not yet touching it, the radio still murmuring faintly at his side. More voices now, overlapping, escalating, and somewhere in the distance, barely audible but growing, the low hum of an approaching engine began to rise, smooth, deliberate, not like the scattered traffic that filled the streets, but something more controlled, more intentional, and Carter felt it before he fully recognized it. That whatever was arriving was not just another unit, not just another layer of routine, but something that would change the meaning of everything that had already happened. The sound of the approaching engine grew clearer, low and controlled, not rushed, not loud, just present in a way that drew attention without asking for it. And one by one heads in the crowd began to turn toward the corner of the street, where a sleek black SUV eased into view, its headlights cutting clean lines across the pavement, its movement deliberate as it slowed without urgency, as if it already knew it would not be stopped. Carter's hand finally touched the cruiser door handle, but did not pull, his focus shifting toward the vehicle as it rolled closer. The radio at his shoulder now alive with overlapping confirmations, units acknowledging the same directive he had received, the same instruction repeating in slightly different tones, each one reinforcing what could no longer be dismissed as a simple correction. Angela remained still inside the cruiser, her gaze steady, her breathing even, the faint reflection of the approaching headlights now visible across the partition, sliding across her face like a quiet signal that something beyond the immediate moment was arriving, something that did not need explanation because it carried its own weight. The SUV came to a smooth stop just a few feet away, engine idling with a soft, steady hum that contrasted sharply with the tension hanging in the air, and for a second nothing happened. No doors opened, no voices called out, just silence stretching across the scene, thick and expectant, as if everyone present understood that whatever came next would matter more than everything that had already unfolded. Carter swallowed subtly, his posture shifting almost imperceptibly as he stepped back half a pace, creating space without fully realizing he was doing it, his training still guiding him, but now layered with something else, something closer to uncertainty than control. The crowd leaned in without moving, phones still raised, but hands steadier now, capturing not just an incident, but a moment that felt like it was about to turn into something larger, something that would not stay contained on a single street corner. Then the driver's side door of the SUV opened, slow and measured, and a man stepped out, tall, composed, dressed in a dark suit that caught the light just enough to reveal its sharp lines without drawing attention to itself. His presence calm but undeniable, the kind that did not need introduction to command focus. He did not rush, did not speak immediately. He simply closed the door behind him and looked once across the scene, his eyes passing over the officers, the crowd, the cruiser, and finally resting on Angela inside. And in that single glance, something shifted again, deeper this time, more personal. Carter felt it before he understood it, the way his shoulders straightened without instruction, the way his grip on the situation loosened even as he tried to hold it together, and the radio at his side went quiet for the first time since the directive had come through, as if even the voices on the other end were waiting. The man took a step forward, then another, each movement steady, controlled, closing the distance without urgency. And when he stopped beside the cruiser, he did not look at Carter first. He looked at Angela, his expression not angry, not alarmed, but something else entirely, something that carried recognition, and only then did he turn his attention to Carter, his gaze level, measured. And in that moment, Carter realized that whatever authority he thought he had a few minutes ago no longer held the same weight as it had before. The silence stretched just long enough to make every second feel heavier, and Carter cleared his throat before speaking, his voice controlled but no longer as certain as before. "Sir, this is an active situation." Yet the words did not carry the same authority they once had, not with the man standing there, not with the way the air had shifted around him. The man did not respond immediately, his attention returning briefly to Angela inside the cruiser, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. Not weakness, not fear, but recognition, something deeply personal that did not need to be spoken out loud. Angela met his gaze through the glass, her posture unchanged, her calm still intact, but there was a subtle release in her shoulders, a quiet acknowledgement that she was no longer alone in the moment. The man stepped closer to the cruiser, stopping just beside the rear door, his hand resting lightly on the frame, not opening it yet, just grounding himself there as he turned his eyes back to Carter, steady, measured, and unmistakably clear. "Officer," he said, his tone even, not raised, not aggressive, but carrying a weight that did not require volume. "I believe you have received instructions." And Carter felt the words settle into him before he could respond. The radio at his shoulder still silent now, as if it had already said everything that needed to be said. Carter nodded once, almost reflexively, his hand tightening around the handle before finally pulling the door open, the motion slower than usual, more deliberate, as if aware that every eye on the street was following it. The door swung outward, and the light spilled inside, breaking the contained space where Angela had been sitting, and for the first time since she had been placed there, the outside world reached her again, not through reflections or muffled sound, but directly, clearly. Carter stepped back, creating space, his posture shifting from command to something closer to formality, and Angela moved carefully, stepping out of the cruiser with the same composed presence she had held from the beginning, her feet meeting the pavement with quiet certainty, her eyes forward, not searching, not reacting, simply present. The man turned slightly toward her, his expression now fully visible, and there it was again, that recognition, that connection that needed no explanation for those who could see it. And though he did not reach for her, did not speak her name, the space between them carried something unmistakable, something that did not belong to strangers. Carter's partner shifted nearby, unsure whether to step in or step back, the uncertainty spreading through the small group of officers like a quiet ripple, each one aware that the situation had moved beyond routine, but not fully understanding how far. The crowd had grown quieter now, the earlier murmurs replaced by a focused stillness, phones still raised but hands steadier, capturing not chaos but a moment of transition, the exact point where control changed hands without anyone announcing it. Carter adjusted his stance, his voice lower now when he spoke again. "Ma'am, you are free to go." The words sounding formal, almost rehearsed, but lacking the ease that usually came with them, and Angela paused for just a fraction of a second before responding, not with anger, not with relief, but with a simple, quiet nod that carried more dignity than any reaction could have. The man finally spoke again, softer this time, directed only to her, though the words were too low for the crowd to hear, and Angela's expression shifted just slightly, not into a smile, not into anything overt, but into something warmer, something that suggested trust, history, and understanding. Behind them, the radio came back to life with distant chatter, but it no longer held the same urgency, no longer commanded the same attention, because the moment had already turned, and everyone present could feel it. Even if they could not yet explain why the air did not return to normal, it shifted into something heavier, quieter, as if the street itself was holding on to what had just happened, and Angela stood there for a moment beside the open cruiser door, her hands now free, her posture unchanged, her calm not broken but deepened, like still water after a storm passes without warning. Officer Carter stepped back another half step, not instructed, not ordered, just moved by something he could not fully name. His eyes no longer fixed in control, but searching, trying to reconcile the version of the situation he had believed minutes ago with the reality now standing in front of him, the man beside. Angela turned slightly. His presence no longer just observed but understood, not through titles or introductions, but through the quiet authority that did not need explanation, and though no badge was shown, no announcement made, the weight of who he was began to settle into the scene like gravity. Angela adjusted the sleeve of her coat slowly, a small, almost ordinary gesture, but one that carried dignity, the kind that could not be taken or given, only revealed. And when she looked at Carter, her eyes did not carry anger, did not demand anything. They simply held a truth that was impossible to ignore. Carter swallowed, his voice lower when he spoke again. "Ma'am, I did not have all the information." The sentence unfinished, uncertain, and for the first time his tone did not sound like procedure. It sounded human, stripped of certainty. Angela tilted her head just slightly, considering him, not as an officer, not as authority, but as a person standing in a moment he did not fully understand. And when she spoke, her voice remained steady. "No, you did not." Not accusatory, not forgiving, just factual. And somehow that made it heavier. The crowd remained silent now, phone still raised but no longer searching for spectacle, instead capturing something quieter, something more difficult to define. The exact moment where power did not disappear but shifted, where certainty dissolved into reflection. The man beside her finally moved his gaze fully to Carter, and there was no hostility there, no raised voice, only a calm expectation that carried more weight than any command. "Officer, situations like this require more than assumption," he said, each word measured, deliberate, and Carter nodded again, slower this time, the meaning landing deeper than the radio directive ever could. Angela took a step forward, away from the cruiser, the distance small but significant, a physical separation from what had just happened, and the flashing lights behind her continued to pulse, but now they felt distant, less dominant, like echoes instead of control. Carter's partner shifted again, glancing between them, unsure where to place himself in a scene that no longer followed familiar lines, and the radio resumed its low chatter, but it no longer commanded the moment. It only filled the silence that remained. Angela paused once more, just long enough to let the moment settle, and then she turned slightly toward the man beside her, their eyes meeting in quiet understanding. No words needed, no explanation required, and together they began to move toward the waiting SUV, each step steady, unhurried, leaving behind a street that would not forget what it had just witnessed. Carter stood still, watching, the weight of the moment settling into him in ways he could not yet process. And for the first time that night, he was not thinking about protocol or procedure. He was thinking about the space between what he assumed and what was real, and how quickly that space could change everything. The distance between the cruiser and the SUV was not far, maybe 15 feet across worn asphalt marked by faded lane lines and scattered reflections of flashing lights. But as Angela walked it, each step carried a quiet weight that no one on that street could ignore, her pace steady, her posture upright, her presence no longer confined to the back of a patrol car, but fully visible, fully undeniable. The man beside her matched her pace without rushing, his hands relaxed at his sides, his gaze forward now, no longer scanning the scene but focused on the path ahead, as if the outcome had already been decided long before he arrived. Behind them, Officer Carter remained where he stood, his body still, his mind not, the earlier certainty replaced by a slow unfolding awareness that pressed against him from all sides, from the silence of the crowd, from the echo of his own words, from the simple, unshaken calm Angela had carried through it all. The flashing lights continued to pulse, red then blue, but they no longer defined the moment, they simply existed in it. like background noise that had lost its authority. Angela reached the SUV. First, her hand pausing briefly near the door handle, not hesitating, just allowing a second of stillness, a breath that marked the transition from what had been to what would follow. And in that pause, the street seemed to hold its breath with her. The man stepped slightly ahead, opening the door with a smooth motion, his gesture quiet, respectful, not performative, and Angela inclined her head once before stepping inside, her movements composed, controlled, carrying the same dignity she had shown from the moment the lights first appeared behind her. The interior of the SUV absorbed her presence without sound, the door closing softly, sealing her from the street, from the lights, from the watching eyes. And for a moment, the reflection on the dark window showed both worlds at once, the inside calm and contained, the outside still shifting, still catching up. The man remained outside for a beat longer, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the door before letting it fall, his gaze turning once more toward Carter, not sharp, not confrontational, just steady, a look that did not accuse but did not excuse either, a look that asked for recognition rather than reaction. Carter met that gaze, and, for the first time since the encounter began, he did not look away, his shoulders squared not in defense but in acceptance of the moment, the realization settling deeper with each passing second that what had happened could not be undone, only understood. The man gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible, and then moved around the vehicle, each step measured, unhurried, as he reached the driver's side and opened the door, the engine still idling with that same quiet confidence as before. Inside, Angela sat with her hands resting gently in her lap, her breathing even, her eyes forward, not watching the crowd, not watching the officers, but focused somewhere beyond them, somewhere that did not require validation or explanation. The door closed again, and the SUV remained still for a moment longer, the engine humming softly beneath the surface of everything else, and then, without urgency, it began to move, pulling away from the curb, from the flashing lights, from the circle of attention that slowly began to dissolve as it passed. Carter watched it go, the shape of it shrinking down the street, the sound of it fading into the distance, and in its absence, the space it left behind felt larger than before, filled not with noise, but with something quieter, something that lingered, a question without words, a lesson without instruction. And he stood there long after the lights around him had dimmed, long after the crowd began to disperse, trying to understand how a moment that started with control had ended with silence, and why that silence felt heavier than anything he had said. The SUV merged into the night traffic without drawing attention, its taillights fading into a steady stream of red ahead, and inside, the world felt different, quieter, insulated from the noise that had filled the street just minutes before. The soft hum of the engine replacing the sharp pulse of sirens, the tension outside dissolving into a controlled stillness that settled over the interior like a breath finally released. Angela sat with her hands resting gently in her lap, her fingers relaxed, no longer carrying the imprint of metal, her posture unchanged, composed, grounded, as if the moment she had just walked through had not shaken her, but revealed something deeper within her. The man beside her drove in silence for a while, his focus on the road, the city lights reflecting across the windshield in slow, shifting patterns, buildings rising and falling in the distance, each one passing like a quiet witness to everything that had just unfolded. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but clear. They should not have put you in that position. Not a question, not an accusation, just a statement that carried weight without force. Angela turned her head slightly, looking out the window as the city moved by, her reflection faint against the glass, layered over the passing lights. They did not know who I was, she replied, her tone steady, but there was something beneath it, not bitterness, not anger, something more reflective, more measured. The man nodded once, his grip on the steering wheel steady. They should have known how to treat you, regardless. And the words lingered in the space between them, not heavy, not sharp, just true in a way that did not need emphasis. Angela exhaled slowly, her gaze still on the moving city, the rhythm of passing streetlights marking time. In quiet intervals, that is the part that matters, she said, almost to herself. And for a moment neither of them spoke again. The silence no longer tense but thoughtful, carrying the weight of what had happened without needing to replay it. Behind them, far back on that street, the scene had begun to dissolve, officers returning to routine, the crowd thinning, phones lowering, but the imprint of the moment remained, not just in memory, but in something less visible, something that would follow each person who had witnessed it. Carter stood there longer than the others, his radio now quiet against his shoulder, his partner speaking to him, but the words barely registering, his attention fixed not on the street, but somewhere inward, replaying details he had not questioned before, the calm in Angela's voice, the certainty in her words, the way the situation had shifted without resistance, without escalation, simply through presence and truth. He rubbed the back of his neck slowly, a small gesture that carried more weight than it seemed, as if trying to ground himself in something familiar, something stable, but the moment had unsettled that foundation, not violently, not abruptly, but enough to make him pause, to make him reconsider the space between what he assumed and what was real. Back inside the SUV, Angela finally turned her gaze forward again, her shoulders easing just slightly, not in relief, but in release, the kind that comes after holding steady for longer than anyone else realizes, and the city opened up ahead of them. Wide streets, distant intersections, lights stretching out into the night like a path that continued without interruption. The man glanced at her briefly, not to check on her, not to question, but simply to acknowledge her presence beside him. And in that glance there was respect, quiet and unspoken, something that did not need to be declared because it had already been proven. The car continued forward, leaving behind not just a street, but a moment that had revealed more than anyone expected. And though the night carried on like any other, something had shifted beneath it, something that would not be easily forgotten, not by those who had watched, not by the one who had acted, and not by the one who had simply remained steady when everything else tried to move her. The city lights stretched farther apart as the SUV moved into quieter streets, the rhythm of traffic thinning, replaced by the soft hum of tires against smooth asphalt. And inside, the silence had shifted again, no longer carrying the weight of reflection, but something steadier, something resolved. Angela leaned back slightly, her shoulders no longer holding the subtle tension they had carried since the first flash of red and blue, her gaze steady ahead, but now there was a quiet clarity in her eyes, the kind that comes not from relief, but from understanding exactly what had just unfolded and what it meant. The man beside her adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, his movements calm, precise, as if every action had already been considered long before this night. And after a moment, he spoke again, his tone measured but softer than before. There will be questions about tonight. Not a warning, not concern, just acknowledgement. Angela nodded once, her fingers interlacing loosely in her lap. There always are, she replied, her voice even, and there was no hesitation in it, no uncertainty, only a quiet acceptance of what came with moments like this. The SUV slowed as it approached an intersection, the red light casting a steady glow across the interior, illuminating both of them in a calm, even wash, and for a second, everything felt suspended. The world outside paused just long enough for the moment to settle completely. "Do you want to address it publicly?" he asked, glancing at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road, and Angela considered the question without rushing, her gaze shifting toward the window where her reflection met the dim outline of the city beyond. "Not yet," she said finally, her tone thoughtful, deliberate. "Tonight was not about making a statement," she added, her voice lowering slightly. "Was about revealing 1 inch." The light turned green, and the car moved forward again, smooth and uninterrupted, the decision hanging in the air not as something heavy, but as something complete. Miles away, back on the street where everything had started, Officer Carter sat inside his patrol car now, the flashing lights turned off, replaced by the dull glow of the dashboard, his radio silent, his hands resting on the steering wheel in a way that suggested he had not moved for some time. The earlier noise, the voices, the urgency had all faded, leaving behind a quiet that felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, because it left too much space for thought. He stared ahead at the empty stretch of road, replaying the sequence not as a series of actions, but as a series of moments he had not fully understood while they were happening. The calm in Angela's voice, the certainty in her words, the way the situation had shifted without resistance, and for the first time, he questioned not what he had done, but why he had done it so easily. His partner spoke from the passenger seat, something about paperwork, about reports that needed to be filed, but Carter only nodded faintly, his attention still elsewhere, because the moment had not ended for him when the SUV drove away. It had just begun. Back inside the moving vehicle, Angela closed her eyes briefly, not to escape the moment, but to let it settle fully, her breath slow and even, and when she opened them again, there was no trace of what had happened on the surface, only the quiet strength that had carried her through it. The city opened up ahead once more, lights stretching into the distance, and as the SUV continued forward, the night seemed unchanged to anyone watching from the outside. But for those who had been part of that moment, something had shifted beneath it, something that would not return to what it had been before. No matter how quietly the world tried to move on, the SUV slowed as it turned onto a quiet, tree-lined street where the city noise faded into a distant hum, the kind of place where porch lights glowed softly and the night felt undisturbed, untouched by what had happened just miles away. And when the vehicle came to a stop in front of a large but understated home, the engine idled for a moment before going still, leaving behind a silence that felt complete rather than empty. Angela did not move right away, her hands still resting calmly in her lap, her gaze forward, as if she was allowing the final weight of the night to settle into place, not resisting it, not holding on to it, just letting it exist exactly as it was. Beside her, the man turned off the ignition and glanced at her, not with concern, not with urgency, but with quiet understanding, the kind that does not need to be spoken. And after a second, Angela nodded faintly, more to herself than to him, before reaching for the door handle. The door opened smoothly, the cool night air meeting her as she stepped out, her shoes touching the ground with the same steady presence she had carried all along. And for a brief moment she stood there, looking at the house ahead, the soft light in the windows, the stillness of the street, everything so ordinary, so unchanged, as if the world had not shifted at all. The man stepped out as well, closing his door with a quiet click, and as he moved around the front of the vehicle, the porch light illuminated his face more clearly now, revealing not just composure, but the weight of responsibility he carried with it, the kind that did not disappear when the moment ended. Angela turned toward him, her expression calm, grounded, and for a second they simply stood there, the space between them filled with everything that had been said and everything that had not needed to be. And then she spoke, her voice soft but certain. "It will stay with him." And the man understood immediately who she meant, his gaze lowering slightly before he nodded. "It should," he replied, not harsh, not judgmental, just honest, because some moments were meant to leave a mark. Back on the quiet street where it had all begun, Officer Carter finally pulled his patrol car away from the curb, the flashing lights long since turned off, the radio silent, the night returning to its usual rhythm, but nothing about it felt the same to him. The road ahead stretching out under the glow of streetlights, each one passing overhead like a steady reminder of the space between who he thought he was and who he had been in that moment. He drove without turning on the siren, without urgency, just moving forward, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes focused but distant, because the shift had already happened, not outside, not in the crowd, but inside him, quiet and irreversible. And in the stillness of that realization, with no voices left to guide him, no commands left to follow, only the echo of a calm voice saying the same sentence twice, he understood something that had nothing to do with titles or authority, something that did not come through radios or orders, something that stayed long after the lights were gone. And as the night closed in around both of them in their separate spaces, the story did not end with words or confrontation. It ended with silence, the kind that does not demand attention but holds it, the kind that lingers long after everything else has moved on.